You're watching the SHW Offroad Daily Drop. I'm Jake. SHW Offroad is one of the leading manufacturers in the USA on internal and external vehicle storage solutions. But today we are going to talk about some of my favorite things about rooftop tents. Yesterday we talked about some of my least favorite things. Today we're going to dive into perhaps what I love about them and why I run them despite having a list of things I don't like about them. So let's dive right in. Favorite things about rooftop tents. Number one is comfort. A lot of people don't understand the comfort that a rooftop tent can bring until they get in one and sleep in one. You're off the ground. Usually you can get better mattress or mattress upgrade options. There are built-in charging ports. There's spaces for shoes. There's gear addicts. There's all kinds of stuff that you can get into a rooftop tent that most ground tents don't have. And it makes the quality of living and the comfort just so much better, and my wife really appreciates that, and my family. So comfort is probably number one, but right after that is speed. A lot of rooftop tents allow you to store things like bedding, sleeping bags, maybe even mats. So setup and tear down with a good rooftop tent is way faster than a ground tent, way faster. Now there are some ground tents that compete nicely with even the quickest rooftop tents. Gazelle makes a good tear down. Free Spirit Recreation, I think, makes a great quick tear down ground tent. So there are other solutions that maybe compete with that, but for the most part, rooftop tents are way quicker to set up and tear down. Number three, it's easier to find a space to camp with a rooftop tent. You don't have to worry about things like gravel, rocks, or other environmental aspects typically you have to worry about on a ground tent, right? Even being off level, it's fairly easy to level a truck. It's almost impossible to level a ground tent. So speed, comfort, easier to find a space to camp. Also, rooftop tents are cleaner. This is one of the biggest things we like about our rooftop tent. It only took a couple of trips of long 2-3 week trips to figure out that ground tents get messy fast. For some reason, they just bring in way more dust, way more dirt. Whereas when you elevate and put your rooftop tent up higher, whether that's like us on a trailer, so it's a little bit lower than, say, on the roof of the vehicle, but it keeps dirt and dust out. It forces you to remove you've got usually a place to put your shoes once you climb up the ladder and stuff like that. So keeps dirt and dust out of the living space, and also they're cleaner in the fact that you don't have to shove a wet, dirty tent in the cargo area of your vehicle, right? Really, you don't even have to touch most of the rooftop tents. You fold them up with a ladder, you pull them down with a pull strap, adhere the cover, and you're done. So it's way, way cleaner. After that is insulation. Most of these rooftop tents, they can be heavier than portable tents, like ground tents, so they can use heavier materials. So they have usually, again, there are ground tents that break this rule, but usually rooftop tents have better insulation, which means better heat retention. And also, a lot of people don't consider how much cooler a tent with good canvas can be in hotter climates, right? They can hold the colder air from the night in and keep the sun out and the heat out too. So insulation is a big one. A big one for my wife and a lot of people is there are way less bugs and critters when it comes to rooftop tents. Usually you'll find less ants, less spiders in a rooftop tent than you will, say, a ground tent. Now, a lot of people like to say that a rooftop tent can keep you safe from animals, and it's a toss-up whether or not. If an animal really wants to get in your tent, it will. It'll climb into your rooftop tent. It will. It'll climb the truck, and a bear will get in your rooftop tent. But it is nice for places elsewhere where you have a lot of animals grazing and you don't want animals to graze right through your campsite and through your tent. A rooftop tent can actually really help with that. So there's that, but also they're typically more durable. Like I said earlier, they can be made heavier because your vehicle is the one carrying it. So they're usually made of more substantial material and framing, so they last longer than ground tents. Now, there are cheap rooftop tents that's not going to be the case, but for the most part, rooftop tents are more durable and they're going to last you longer and they're going to give you a better return on investment over time. Typically, rooftop tents come in a few different form factors. So I've covered what I love about them. And all that really far outweighs the cons that I talked about yesterday, in my opinion. That's up to you to weigh whether that's the case for you. There are people that a rooftop tent just doesn't make sense. And there are some ways around common, problems with rooftop tents. Like a common one is people really don't want to have to climb the ladder to get up into their sleeping space. Well, you can mount a rooftop tent low, whether that's on a truck bed or in a trailer like we do, and it really helps with the ladder problem. You still usually have to use a ladder, but climbing 3 feet up in the air is way different than 6 or 7 feet in the air, right? So there are a lot of workarounds to some of the common problems with rooftop tents. You just might have to get creative. But I'm going to jump into the different form factors of rooftop tents now, and maybe talk about some of my favorite brands as well. There are 2 major manufacturing or form factors for rooftop tents. You've got hard shell and soft shell, and you've got subcategories under those. So a lot of the hard shells can fall in 2 categories. You've got what's called a clamshell, and you've got a wedge. In fact, I can give you an idea of what that looks like. So this is Free Spirit Recreation. I use their tent. It's a great tent. They make good tents in general. I believe they make them in China. But there are plenty of USA manufacturers that have similar form factors to this. But their Odyssey series is a good example of a hard shell clamshell. And it's a hard shell because it's got a hard shell, and it's clamshell because it kind of opens up like a clam. They're great. It's a great form factor. The advantages of a clamshell, usually you get more space than, say, a wedge, especially when you look at like iCamper. So if you check out iCamper, and their form factor on their tents, it's pretty incredible how much space is inside one of their clamshells. You could fit almost a small family in this kind of form factor. But that's a clamshell. This is more a traditional wedge. If you look at their Aspen series, this one kind of has a bump out here. Not a lot of the wedges do, but a wedge looks like a wedge. You've got a small skinny part on one side, and then it opens up to a tall side on the other. There are tons of different wedges out there. Alucab is a famous one. There are lots of manufacturers out there that make wedge style. There are pros and cons to the wedge. The wedge is uber fast to set up. It is probably the fastest form factor to set up at camp. But it comes with some trade-offs. Usually room is a lot harder to come by in these. Some taller people have a hard time fitting in them or getting comfortable in them rather. Whether they just don't have the feet or the room at the feet, or just the length isn't quite there for them, or the height isn't quite what they need. So wedge and clamshell are the common hard shell form factors for rooftop tents. Now there is another category called the soft shell, and really, I think in my opinion, these were some of the first I saw, and a lot of people have graduated from the soft shell or soft cover to the hard covers. Now this is actually the tent I run. It's called the High Country series, and it folds out to make a full bed and stuff like that, and it's got a soft cover. Now the common problems with soft shells are the setup and tear down time. The cover can be a pain to put on and take off, but the cool thing about Free Spirit Recreation is they don't use a typical zipper all the way around. In my opinion, that's a really flawed design. If you have to run a zipper all the way around the tent, it takes forever. It can be a huge pain if it's clogged with dirt, and it can be a really big issue in the cold too, right? So I like quick setup and tear down, in the High Country series from Free Spirit Recreation. Is one of the few, or it's probably one of the quickest soft shell tents out there, and there are some others as well. So some other cons to the soft shell as opposed to the hard shell. Usually you cannot store as much bedding in a soft shell, right? So since you have to fold this down in half, you don't have all the room to put bedding, pillows, and stuff like that, or mats, because this has got to fold flat for transport. Whereas in a wedge or even in a clamshell, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them allow you to store some bedding, usually more than a soft shell. So that's another kind of con against the soft shell and a pro to a hard shell. But again, to recap, hard shell, 2 categories, wedge versus say like a clamshell, and then the soft shell is the one that folds in half and then opens up 180 degrees. But there are tons of manufacturers. It's a very saturated market. If you want a good way to learn about these and make an educated buying decision, call your local dealer. We have tons of local SHW Offroad. If you go to our website, go to the About Us tab and look at our dealers. All of our dealers represent some of the best rooftop tent manufacturers in the country. So talk to them, call them. IF Overlanding out in Idaho Falls is our partner. We've got TAV down in New Mexico. We've got Juniper in Colorado. We have Commonwealth 4x4 here in Kentucky, and many more. So talk to a local dealer, get your hands on some of this stuff, pick their brain, and to find out really what's best for you. But that's my opinion. You've heard all about what I love and what I hate about rooftop tents and the form factors and stuff. Tomorrow, in a similar vein, I'm going to cover 270-degree awnings. They're all the rage right now. I'm going to talk about some of the pros and maybe some of the cons and what to look out for in 270-degree awnings. So join me tomorrow. In the meantime, have a great day, and thanks again for joining me. All right, bye-bye.